Thank you very much. Now, I remember asking Ian if we could get Cynthia McKinney to speak, and I'm so thrilled that she could come. Her truth radiates from her. I'll tell you a little story. I won't go into the ramming too much, but I heard, I think from Neville Jones in the audience, that she had been silenced in the US, having been a congresswoman for, I think, 5 years. And that's about all I knew about her. And then, on the 27th of December last year, a bombardment started at Gaza, which killed 250 people in the first 15 minutes. Quite a lot of children, mostly policemen who were graduating. And they also eliminated the civil defense officers as well, so the ambulance controls were, at least, shall we say, sketchy. Anyway, Cynthia McKinney flew across the Atlantic to join a boat in Larnaca, and I flew the much shorter distance from Heathrow to join 14 other shipmates in Larnaca on a fairly smart-looking motor yacht, the Dignity. And so I first met Cynthia, and I'm so pleased I did, at about 7 o'clock on a dark, rather wet evening in Larnaca, at a funny little press conference where I'm fairly certain there was a spy present who was keeping good check of who was on the list of passengers. Anyway, we set off, and after a fair calm, it got rougher, and I vomited for the next 8 hours. Cynthia didn't. She was across the saloon from me. There were cartons. We couldn't lie down because they'd put about a few tons of medical supplies from Cyprus government down in the down below in the sleeping quarters, in the berths. Anyway, at 5 o'clock in the morning, we were then about 53 miles off the coast, off Haifa. It was dark. There was a force 5 wind, and about a 10-foot sea. The boat was doing about 20 knots down the waves, and I saw searchlights come astern at about 5 o'clock, and I guess that they were these very fast 45-knot patrol gunboats. And after half an hour, it seemed to go quiet, and then suddenly there was the most tremendous crash on the port bow. The bow dipped, another crash, and another crash opposite, on the port beam opposite me, where in fact Cynthia was sitting. And I can remember Cynthia's big eyes when I first met her, and her eyes were a bit bigger at that stage. And I thought we were going to break up, actually, and we were going to go down. And Cynthia said, "I can't swim, David." Well, that was the same for another crew member called Quiva Butterley, a fine young Irish woman. I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but there was no question that they were going to drown us. If it was a glass reinforced fiber hull, it would have shattered. We'd have scooped water quickly into the bow. There were 2 Detroit diesel engines down below, 840 horsepower, massive engines, and we would have gone down like a stone, and anyone surviving would have been run down by these very fast boats. And I have a feeling that Cynthia was the target. That's what I think, because she's very outspoken about injustice, and particularly about the injustice suffered by the Palestinians. I am also a thorn in their side, as are some others, but I'm a very small thorn, I think, compared with Cynthia. So that's how I met her, and then we put into Tyre about 5 hours away. It's quite a long story, really, and I hardly slept for the next 3 days, but I'm fairly certain that both Cynthia's phone and my phone was disabled partly, because there were lots of calls coming in, but we couldn't, in fact, speak out. Do you remember that, Cynthia? And Lebanon is that sort of country. It's deeply infiltrated. You don't know what you're up to. So that's how I met Cynthia. And although it was, shall we say, in that overused word, traumatic, I'm damn pleased I met her. And we've corresponded a bit since then. Now, I spent 2 years as my first 2 years of surgical training in Bristol. We saw old home to the Frenchy at Southmead and the BRI and at an orthopedic hospital now closed. and also a funny little place doing urology down the Ham Green. So I know Bristol a bit, and there are two places. This is why I'm setting the context. I'm setting this in context, this talk, and I'm setting us in the context of our world as it is. Oh yes, you've got the slide, I can see that. There are two roads called White Ladies Road, and there's a pub called the Black Boy, sorry, there's this hill called Black Boy Hill, named after a pub called the Black Boy Pub. If you look in Wikipedia, they dismiss any connection with the slave trade as it happens. It's a fairly short account. But if you look in the Port of Bristol Museum website, there's a lot of information. This comes up. Now just look at that a moment. Just read the slide. You remember what Orwell said? The future is a boot on the face forever. Our boot was on the black woman and black man's face then. If you look around Bristol, there are churches right in every street. It was a rich city, and Christianity was part of it. They justified that because it was a dark continent. And you tell me that the boat which took your forebears to America came to a port in South Carolina. They took goods to Africa, exchanged them for slaves, and the slaves were taken across, and I think something like a third of the slaves would die on average before they got to the shores of the Caribbean or to America. But that was then, and the predatory European was at the bottom of it, or rather at the top of it. And it continues to this day. I'm talking about the Palestinians, the Afghans, the Iraqis, who've lost over 1 million of their people, the Pakistanis, that thing, what is it called, AFPAC, that damned expression, typically American expression, the AFPAC lot. And all over the world, the European boot remains on the face. Now, I'd like to just show the next slide. This is Mr. Matan Vilnay. He's the Deputy Defense Minister of the lawless entities, I call it. Other people call it Israel. And in February of 2008, he promised a greater Shoah to the Palestinian people, not the fellows with the AK-57s, the people. Do you know what Shoah means? It means Holocaust in Hebrew. So here we have, we're now 66 years from the Jewish, the Polish, the Roma Holocaust, and the killing of 37 million people in the Second World War. And here is a man who's promising a greater Shoah to a densely packed civilian population. That's why we came, wasn't it? And it started, and I just told you how it started, and it went on until the 18th of January of this year. And it was started on a pretext, like all wars are started pretty well, including Hitler's war on Poland and the rest of it. Now let's press on to the next slide. That is a mother with her 3 children, all dead. So some father, some husband is mourning their loss still. And the next slide, that is quite obviously a military target. An apartment block, as you can see. They have special bombs which have fuses set so the bomb can go down through the floors and it explodes when it's near the bottom. And they can set the fuse in the cockpit. Next slide. This is General Gabi Ashkenazi. His name shows the derivation of quite a few Israeli Jewish names. They were Khazars, they were converts in about 600 in what is now, I suppose, partly Kazakhstan. But Gabi Ashkenazi, 2 weeks ago, has promised a little Shoah to the people of Gaza. Here we are, 64 years or whatever it is from the Nuremberg trials, and we've got 2 people promising Holocaust to people. What the hell's going on? And we're here partly today to make damn sure it stops. They're regarding these people as an Untermenschen. And exactly that, I use that word because that's what the Germans referred to the Jews, the Romans, and other people, the under people. And if you go to Palestine, you know exactly how they're being regarded. They're right down there. Now, I want to quote Mr. Brown at the Cenotaph. He's one of our chief psychopaths in this country. And I really mean it, actually. You'll hear him talking about the poor child of his that died, and people start to feel sympathetic for him. But he doesn't feel sympathetic for a child in a mud house in Afghanistan that's in fact raised by a predator drone from Cynthia's country, fired by a fellow with a joystick sitting in Arizona or somewhere. And in fact, a private employee of Blackwater's, I now discover. He said this: "It's right we explain there is a chain of terror that links Pakistan and the Afghanistan-Pakistan border to the streets of our cities in Britain." He said that on Cenotaph Day, Remembrance Sunday. And he said it on Politics Today or something. Don't look at those damn programs. This is what I say. There is an axis of evil with Tel Aviv at one pole and Washington at the other. In the center is London, where barbarity and treachery are clothed in plummy speech and fine spectacle. Along this axis, all the psychopaths fly from one command center to another, and that's true. God, I loathe them. As a doctor, I loathe them. I loathe them, and we can't influence them. Nothing changes them. We've got to change them. The next slide. That's Mr. Ashkenazi. This slide I showed actually in April. You may remember it, the people who were there. And I've revivified it. I showed it, in fact, to a medical audience. And I managed to move. There were rather wonderful young people, actually, medical students, and some of the staff came along as well. I've been asked to speak to the staff later on. I'm very pleased to say, because doctors are not in the vanguard of any movement to stop killing or maiming, I'm sorry to say. Now, you'll see what I say. Those are my words. It's the essence. When you work it all down, you can talk about justice. Justice is truth. Justice is truth. It's all about truth and love. Now, we have tonight a speaker who speaks the truth. She will, as well as speaking the truth, show her love of humanity. I often divide people, and it's quite easy usually, into life-denying and life-enhancing. And I'm quite certain that Cynthia is life-enhancing. Cynthia.
Well, that certainly is a beautiful introduction, a very beautiful and heartfelt introduction. Perhaps this is a little better. And I really appreciate David starting off with the slave trade, because I have been so blessed in my 12 years of Congress and after to have traveled all over the world. And when I look into the faces of people all over the world, there's a little bit of envy in me, because I see people who know who they are, who know where they come from, who are certain of their identity. And because I'm a descendant of slaves, I don't know where I came from. And so that bit of lack of identity or rootlessness is a part of me, and it's a part of all of the black people in the United States who also are descendants of slaves. It's a part of the legacy that is rarely acknowledged. Thank you, David, for acknowledging that little bit of my own history. Now, with respect to the alternative view and shifting the paradigm, I was referred to this conference by some friends whose work on a daily basis is to shift the paradigm. And so when they recommended me, and I received the email from Ian, then I said, yes, of course, I will come. And I didn't realize until like yesterday that the Ian Crane who sponsors the alternative view is actually the Ian Crane who did the video that I saw on YouTube, Codex Alimentarius. Now, for someone whose favorite film is Soylent Green, I looked at Ian Crane with much interest. And so I am extremely pleased now to be here at AV3 with that Ian Crane. Now, the previous speaker concluded his remarks with a song. And the refrain of the song was, "This is my word, this is my song, this is my joy, this is my faith, and this is my strength." And as that song, which was a very pretty song, was playing, I tried to place my own word, my own song, my own joy, my own faith, my own strength into that refrain. And so what I came up with is, this is my word, truth. This is my song, justice. This is my joy, peace. This is my faith, the dignity of every person. And this is my strength, love, just like David said. So I think my story and David's story exists because we, as two individuals coming from vastly different places in history and on this planet, have seen at least one thing, and that is that we are suffering through a failure of national institutions that are supposed to deliver justice to us, and we are also suffering through the failure of these international justice institutions. And so what are we to do in the face of such failure when it comes to justice? Many of us have decided that we are now going to institute people's justice. We will represent people's justice. And that actually is what happened in 2001 when the people of Japan decided that they were going to do an investigation of U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan, and they founded the Afghanistan Tribunal. And then there's the Brussels Tribunal that looks at U.S. and U.K. war crimes in Iraq. There's the Katrina Tribunal, and the Katrina Tribunal took place in the United States, and it looked at the crimes against humanity that were committed by various levels of governments inside the United States as the people of the Gulf Coast in the United States, particularly the people of New Orleans, were failed at every turn. And then the most recent tribunal of which I am a part is the Malaysia Tribunal. I am a part of the convening organization, which is the Malaysia Peace Organization. And basically what, under the leadership of the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Tun Dr. Mahathir, what the Malaysia Tribunal seeks to do is to hold these national leaders accountable for the crimes that they have committed in our names and not on our behalf. I am pleased to report to you that just a series of days ago, the Malaysia Tribunal indicated that both Tony Blair and George W. Bush could be tried for war crimes, torture, crimes against humanity, and of course, crimes against the peace. So look forward to May of 2010, when that trial will take place. But now I'm also supportive of a group that is affiliated with the Brussels Tribunal. And as you may know, this group of individual citizens decided that they would look to Spain, because Spain has delivered something that very few other states have been willing to deliver, and that is a little bit of justice for those of us who are outraged at torture and war crimes and the rest. And so now 4 UK leaders and 4 US leaders have been put to book in the Spanish courts before their change of universal jurisdiction law. And right now, the case is moving its way through the Spanish courts. Yes, it is possible that George W. Bush will get his day in court. Yes, it is possible that Tony Blair will get his day in court, and so too Gordon Brown and Barack Obama. And then there are the cases of individuals going that extra step themselves. And in March of next year in Canada, there will be a case in which I hope to participate on behalf of a Native American by the name of Splitting the Sky. He sought to deliver a warrant for the arrest of George W. Bush, who happened to be in Canada receiving approximately $150,000 at a speaking engagement. Well, of course, Splitting the Sky was arrested, but his day in court will be our day in court, because we intend to bring up all of the transgressions, all of the criminal behavior for which George Bush should be tried. And then, of course, that leads to me and David, and how we came to be on a boat called the Dignity in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea when the Israelis decided to find us. Now, David might have a point when he says that the Israelis were targeting for me, because interestingly, the Dignity had run 5 successful times before the time that I was on the boat. The Dignity had left Cyprus and reached Gaza, left Cyprus, reached Gaza, and so forth 5 times. On the 6th time, when I'm on the boat and I don't know how to swim, didn't know how to put my life jacket on, thank goodness for David, Because otherwise, well, you know, what can I say? Don't know how to swim, never been on a boat, don't know how to put the life jacket on, but I never got seasick. But all the while, we did have the CNN journalist Carl Penhall on board with us, and we had 2 journalists from Al Jazeera on board with us. One of those Al Jazeera journalists was Sami El-Haj. Sami El-Haj, I had to apologize to him. As an American, I find myself apologizing to so many people all over the world who have been damaged because of U.S. foreign policy. Well, Sami El-Haj, journalist for Al Jazeera, was in Afghanistan covering U.S. military action in Afghanistan. He was clearly identifiable as a member of the press. And in fact, he informed people that he was a member of the press. Didn't matter. Sami El-Haj, Guantanamo prisoner number 345 for 6.5 years. How do we give this man his life back? 6.5 years taken from him. And all the Americans have to say is that it was a case of mistaken identity. But the record should reflect that the United States military serially targeted members of the press, particularly Al Jazeera. This was one more in a line of egregious acts committed by true journalists who were the embedded ones that had the U.S. sanction, because their goal and their mission was to tell us the truth. Now, compare that to the case of CNN, who also had a journalist on board the boat, Carl Penhall. Now, Carl Penhall was, in fact, a journalist, because despite being rammed by the Israelis, being threatened by the Israelis, CNN headquarters was arguing with Carl about the content of his report. They wanted Carl to lie and say and repeat the Israeli disinformation rather than telling the truth about what was in place happening to us at the time. CNN headquarters wanted Carl Penhall to lie, and being the journalist that he is, he refused to lie, and that's how you know the truth. After that event, the Israeli consulate in Atlanta, which is my hometown, put out a press release and said that it was all my fault, that I had encouraged these young activists to place themselves in harm's way. And that just showed how truly desperate the Israelis were at that time, and I believe still are. And you can go to the CNN.com website and you can see the interview that I did. You can see the report of Carl Penhall. You can see the complete devastation of the boat, and then you can also see the letter, the press release that the Israelis put out. In that interview that I did while we just off the boat from Lebanon, I said that the Israelis might have deterred us, but they didn't cause us to forget our mission. And in fact, that's exactly what happened, because the Free Gaza Movement, which had called me and asked me, I think it was a day after Christmas, do you want to go to Gaza the next day? And I had never heard of the Free Gaza Movement, but I said yes anyway. The Free Gaza Movement had to replace the boat. Their boat, the Dignity, had been completely destroyed by the Israelis, and of course the matter of insurance and all of that litigation is still being worked through, but the bottom line is that the Free Gaza mission, which is consists of young people who have decided that the blockade of Gaza is unacceptable and that they are willing to put their entire bodies against the machine to stop that policy. They want to assert not only their human rights, but the human rights of the Palestinian people. And so they are willing to do that. And I joined them. Well, they did do their fundraising, and they did raise enough money to send another boat to Gaza, or at least to try. And so I got a second call from the Free Gaza Movement saying, you didn't make it that time. You want to go again? Now, my mother was like coming out of her skin the first time. So now you can imagine what she was thinking the second time. Maybe I need to be on the 8th floor of the public hospital, which is the mental ward. Well, anyway, undeterred, I said yes. And then the Spirit of Humanity set sail. The Spirit of Humanity is a wonderful name for this boat. Well, first of all, and I don't want to talk too long because I want to have interaction with you all, but the Spirit of Humanity was a ferry, and it was slow. It was so slow that I walked faster than that boat goes. So, David, while we were on the Dignity, which was a 15-hour trip, the Spirit of Humanity was a 30-hour trip. Still, I didn't get sick. And so, you know, we're all excited and we're going, and then there's been this song that's been written, We Won't Go Down Tonight, which is a song about Gaza and the people of Gaza and the spirit of the people of Gaza. So we reached that point where the Dignity had been rammed. And then the captain with whom I bonded, everybody knew I was a sicko case because I didn't know how to swim. And so the captain came and, you know, he said, this is the spot. And we kind of stopped there for a moment to remember, you know, what had happened with us on the Dignity. And then we proceeded. Of course, the Israelis were not going to let a moment slip by where we could just have it to ourselves to ponder what we were doing. No, because then all of a sudden out of nowhere, they have now, David, they have this wave-making machine. It's as if they knew that the boat didn't have a keel, and so they just shook us and shook us and shook us and shook us like this, and we're just going up and down, and we don't know what they're going to do to us because, of course, they've proven with what they did to the Dignity that they're capable of anything. Although we trust that the government of Israel is going to be a law-abiding government. it was not to be the case that night, just as it wasn't the case with the dignity. And they shut off our GPS, thinking that they could force our captain to go off course and then meander into Israeli waters, which would give them the excuse to pick us up. But we had a darn good captain. And so he didn't do that. He didn't stray off course one bit. Okay, plan A fails. So then they have to go to plan B. And eventually, the what can I say? I'm trying to think of the word. Somebody can help me. Well, eventually what happened is that there was what? Ah, gosh, yes. Eventually, the boat was boarded. And so then it became very serious. We had these great big huge ninja type people, and they completely took over the boat. They completely commandeered the boat and basically left us at the very whim of the Israeli forces. It was scary again, because this time, while, you know, we had some fear about falling into the Mediterranean Sea, we had already fallen into the hands of the Israelis. And then they took us not to Gaza, they took us to Israel. Now, you can imagine how frightening that was, and we were paraded. We had to have our hands up in the air, and we were taken off the boat, and there I was held a prisoner in an Israeli prison for 7 days. What was my crime? My crime was that I wanted the children of Gaza to be able to play with their crayons. I wanted the children of Gaza to be able to experience life. And that was too much. Even that alone was too much. 7 days in a real prison. I hadn't even been to prison in the United States. And yet I had the honor and distinction, I guess you would call it, of serving these 7 days in an Israeli prison. Now, I have, and I will conclude with this, I'm not Arab or I'm not Muslim. You know, I guess perhaps I'm one of the unlikely people that would be fighting for Palestinian rights. But let me just say that I'm not fighting for Palestinian rights. I'm fighting for human rights. I'm fighting for everybody's rights. And many people have asked me, why do you do it, and where do you get your strength from? I'll just give this one response, and that is that I took it very seriously when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that justice was indivisible. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I want to acknowledge everyone in this room because I know in your own way, you represent justice. And you're willing to take a stand even when it's inconvenient, even when it's unpopular. You are willing to take a stand for justice. We need more people who are willing to take a stand for justice. Because with truth, we get justice. Justice, we get peace. Peace, we have dignity. Dignity, we have love. That's what this is all about. I'm happy to be a part of shifting the paradigm for all of the right reasons and with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
Thank you. You are so brave, and you've really touched my heart with what you're doing. Absolutely incredible. It makes me feel like I want to come with you, and I want to kind of get behind you and really support you. What I'd like to know is what kept you going in those 7 days of being incarcerated unjustly? And, and again, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for the question. Basically, what kept me going was, how can I say this? We had access to telephone and SIM card, but it wasn't because, it was like, you're not supposed to have certain communication tools in your prison. But we had them, and then we were able to communicate via the internet to a larger community. And so what kept us going was our ability to do that communication and the knowledge that there were people who were waiting to hear what the next message was going to be.
Thank you.
I didn't even know, I didn't know anything about your story at all with regard to you being in prison or anything like that, so gosh. My question is to do with September the 11th. It's quite a recent-ish revelation to me. But I was just thinking, if there's such psychos, running the world and that sort of thing, do you have any feelings about, what future possible capabilities, or is that too an awful question?
What are the future capabilities are?
I just, they talk about foreshadowing, I think there was some minister or someone that said, well, they might leave a nuclear bomb in a briefcase in New York or something like that. So,
Well, there's a whole lot of mights that could happen. But I don't believe we should be motivated by fear or sort of bound by our fears. We can't allow fear to take over. And actually, once we know what the, how can I say this, the enemies are, if we know who they are, well, let me put it this way. My father told me, and this is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, remember? He said, I'm not fearing any man. The night before he was killed, he said, I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That's what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said at that I've been to the mountaintop speech of his. And if we allow our fear of the known to overcome us, then we really won't accomplish anything. What my father told me, he told me two things. One, which was kind of not true, was that, entering into the world of politics, I was entering into a man's world. That's what my dad said. But there was another part of it. And my father told me, don't be afraid of them, meaning these highfalutin elected officials, mostly men. He said, don't be afraid of them because they put their pants on just like you do. Now that was insightful. And so, you know, when you look at Gordon Brown, for example, he's not smarter than you are. Now, okay. Exactly. And certainly George W. Bush, come on. Okay, so the aura of invincibility that these people have has been shed. We know what they are. But now, are we going to accept, as the last speaker said, talked about personal responsibility? We are not going to change the problem until every one of us accepts that responsibility that we are going to be a part of the change by doing something. And so David got on that boat and did something. And I got on the boat twice and did something, and I'm looking now for something else to do. Far more things. Because when activists and leaders who preceded me, when they said things, I listened. I heard them. So when Mario Savio stood in front of that arch on the University of California campus and said, we've got to put our entire bodies against the gears and the wheels and the levers of the machine, and we say to the owners of the machine, either you stop it or we're going to stop it. I meant that. Right.
Could you tell us a bit more about the tribunals, how they're set up, you know, for trying Bush and... is it the case that the tribunal will end up in an indictment for these people that then has to progress to some other level or something? If you could explain a bit more about that, that would be interesting. There's an awful lot of corrupt officials in the world. It's not just them. You know, our local councils and all of the magistrates' courts are completely corrupt. There's an awful lot of folk that we could, you know, try if we knew how. So.
Yes, in fact, I encourage you to look at what we're doing with the Brussels Tribunal, and the Malaysia Tribunal, and then replicate it on the local level. And I'm sure that there's no dearth of elected officials who deserve to be tried.
Hi, Cynthia. I have a question to you that's not related. Just one thing. Can you now swim? If not, you need to learn.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
You need to learn. We can't afford to lose people like you.
Oh. Are you going to teach me? Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to get your email address, okay?
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi.
Just like to say, first of all, you and David, I think, work super well together. It resonates very strongly because he represents to me this tremendous wisdom with empathy, and for you, what I get from you is the humanity with optimism. So my question is, what are the main reasons to be optimistic that we are going to win and that good always wins?
Gee, I don't know if good always wins. My son contacted me the other day, and he said he was confused because he was taking an ethics class, and you know, he's not supposed to cheat and lie and steal, and yet examples, I guess the world is replete with examples of where people cheat and lie and steal, and they win. They get away with it. And so, you know, what we teach our kids and what they experience in their own lives, even as students, is different, causes that cognitive dissonance that the sociologists talk about. Well, it's kind of like the propaganda. Of course, I wasn't surprised when I read that the CIA had its psychological operations agents in the CNN newsroom. It'd be interesting to see what's in the BBC newsroom. So we must understand that there's a world out there that is being painted by our state arms of propaganda, and then there's our own lives. And it's quite different what we see there. The world is painted there, and our own experiences. That difference to me is good, because it will encourage people to look at their objective reality, and it's not going to match that. Like, for example, the United States is out of recession. That's what they said. The United States is out of recession. And unfortunately, the speaker previous to me talked about the 98% or 92% of people who are employed. Well, first of all, U.S. statistics don't tell the truth. And so our unemployment rate is closer to 20%. Now, I'm not going to rejoice at the 80% who have their jobs, because it's not good enough for a government that spends trillions of dollars on war to have 20% unemployed. In some of our areas, our high school students are dropping out at a rate of 50%. You at least, you get sick, you go to the doctor. Well, my aunt just a few weeks ago got sick. She went to the doctor and she never went home. Some people's lives don't count in the United States. A simple colonoscopy for my aunt. The doctor sends her home with her bowel punctured. She calls in distress and they tell her, go to sleep. Her daughter calls 911. She's rushed to the hospital. The repair job is done. And we have insurance, and the debate that's going on in the United States right now is a health insurance debate. It's not a health care debate. Now they want everybody to buy insurance, the same insurance that my aunt had. So what does the hospital do that caused the problem? They call up and they say, we're not going to pay you for repairing her bowel because she's our patient. So while she's in intensive care, she has to get shipped back to the offending hospital because of health insurance in the United States. Then they gave her morphine twice. She hung on for an additional month, but my aunt is dead because of the so-called health care system in the United States. And 85,000 black people die every year, according to our former Surgeon General, Dr. David Satcher, because of the quality of care that they get after they go into the doctor's office. I have been preaching for the last 15 years about these statistics, and now the statistic is my own family. And now we come to learn that an additional 40,000 white people die because they don't get a quality of care. And nobody in the United States Congress is talking about that. But they are about to pass the largest Pentagon appropriation bill since George W. Bush declared the so-called war on terror. Something is terribly wrong with our world. And if those of us who can see retreat and do nothing, it will only get worse. We cannot afford to do nothing.
Should we conclude that the American public is behind what's going on in Israel? Because is it generally understood over there that the Congress votes billions of dollars every year in aid to Israel, and that if that were cut down or stopped, that would be the only leverage, and that would be effective pressure?
The sad fact of the matter is that we don't have real and true democracy in the United States. Because if we did, we'd have a different Congress, and the policies that are voted into law by that Congress would be different. We have, unlike you guys, where there's a 10,000 pound maximum that any individual candidate for the parliament can spend. Well, let's put it this way. In 2002, when I was initially targeted by the Israeli lobby, I spent over $1 million, and that wasn't enough. My opponent spent even more than me. In 2006, when I was targeted again, I won. I didn't have very much money. You know, people know me in the state of Georgia, so name recognition is not the problem, but because of the business that the special interest media do on me, I do have to advertise to try and dispel the myths that have been reported by the special interest press about me, and that costs money in the United States. Well, I still got outspent. Rarely in the United States does an incumbent get outspent, but in 2006, I was the only Democratic incumbent who lost re-election, and I lost because, according to the Democratic leadership, I wasn't a team player. And I wasn't a team player because I was going to vote no on the war. I was going to vote no. And they counted their votes, and they knew that they only had enough votes no votes to spare. So they recruited someone to run against me. This is the way it works. And this is why I asked on Friday night, I believe it was, to find out how this operates in the UK. But in the United States, I call it the special interest media, and they support the special interest political parties, and the special interest political parties then put forward special interest candidates. And the people's interest gets lost in all of that. And because of the need for money, intensive amounts of money, then you go to the special interest. And I lost. The bill to fund the war passed in the House with exactly the number of votes required. And if I had been there to vote no, then maybe people in the United States would be talking about the peace dividend, and you wouldn't be talking about sending more troops to Afghanistan. That's how critical all of this is. The mechanism of politics itself. When they say that politics is the authoritative allocation of values in a society, that's what's taught to political science majors in undergraduate school. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't happen. It's all distorted in our system in the United States because of the influence of money. And I guarantee you that if you track it here, maybe it's not found on the candidates, but it will be found in the political parties themselves. And I think you've had a couple of scandals. So the first thing is for us to understand what real democracy is. I just visited a country. Oh, and I shouldn't be talking so long, but I just visited a country where human rights, where health care is treated as a human right. And you know what how that manifests itself? You go to the doctor, you get your medication, you don't get a bill. I just visited a country where education is considered a human right. My cousin, who is she's no more than 24 years old, is $100,000 in debt because she wanted an undergraduate degree. That is not a society that values education. But I just came from a country where education is treated as a human right, and guess what? The students are paid all of their living expenses while they're in school up through the PhD. Now, I'm struggling to get my PhD. I will end with this. A Hurricane Katrina survivor, fed up with the United States, fed up with discrimination and racism and apartheid that we still have in the United States, took her little $2,500 FEMA check and said, I'm going to Brazil. That young woman is now pursuing her PhD, and she has all of her living expenses paid, plus she gets a monthly stipend. That's a country that values education, and that's not what we have in the United States. And that's what animates me to do what I do, because I am impatient for change. I am hungry for justice, but more important than anything else, I see the alternative view, and my work is to shift the paradigm. Thank you.